Up next, Daniel Alan Johns presents Myth.OS, Mythical Operating System, Investigating Simulation Theory, Non-Human Intelligence, and Unexplained Phenomena.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for staying tuned to this sixth and final Streamathon fundraiser series that the Anomaly Archives, a 501c3 nonprofit, aka the Scientific Anomaly Institute, has been holding since November 21st. And we are excited to bring on a good friend. We've not had that much chance to hang out and get to know each other that well, but man, like, I don't think I actually met him at the Paramania in 2016, but that's, I think, how he came into the sphere of paranormal friends that we now consider our local Central Texas and climbs northward friend. He is an explorer of consciousness and all things anomalous. He's the proprietor of the Vortex YouTube channel. He is a drummer and an instructor in the art of drumming, an author, composer, reporter, editor, producer. I highly recommend his YouTube channel and everything he puts his hand to. I think he's also won some Roswell costume contests as well. So without further ado, here is Daniel Alan Jones. Hey, my friend, how are you doing?
Hey, Smiles, good to be here. Thanks for that awesome introduction. And that's right. Yeah, we crossed paths at that 2016 Paramania, and it was something that I wasn't really even too familiar with at the time, but our good friend Nick Redfern kind of passed the word along, and that's how I ended up kind of falling into that cadre there. So that was really cool to be able to have that initial interaction, even if like at a minimal level, and then to see how that really grew into everything that we've done since then, and sort of done to cross paths from that point on. And like you said, Roswell, we met up there as well. And just with everything that we were able to do at that initial interaction, I was fortunate to meet up, with Greg Bishop, of course, and a number of other people. That was a really awesome way to just get connected with everything those guys were doing as well. So I'm glad to be here. It's really awesome to be part of the Streamathon for the Anomaly Archives, and appreciate your introduction.
Well, I appreciate your participation, and I'm glad that we had this opportunity. Of course, would love to have you as a in-person presenter at the Anomaly Archives or wherever we end up. But thank you so much for helping us try to raise these funds, and I'm certainly very thankful to be able to spread the word about folks like yourself who are so active in this field. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up your slides and let you get started. So thank you.
Sure thing. So it's great to see everyone coming together to be able to support this awesome opportunity for our community and those who are interested in learning more about these anomalies, these mysteries of our world and beyond, because I think it's what helps us propel further into the world of the unknown and the unexplained. And that's really what we're going to be getting into today. So I'm honored to be presenting a sort of preview to my upcoming book, Myth.OS, which is short for Mythical Operating System. And that's going to be something that touches on several different facets of science, technology, mysterious phenomena, and ancient mysteries, and things that really bridge together, I think, the gap between things like spirituality and scientific modern understanding of these concepts. And so it's going to be touching upon areas that deal with some familiar subjects that we've heard throughout the last several Streamathons, like UFOs, strange paranormal activity, cryptozoology, and things that deal with parapsychology and just delving into the unknown and what that means for us socially, anthropologically, and how it will affect where we go into the future. So this is sort of the cover of the book I'm working on right now, and this is going to be dealing with, it says in the subtitle there, Exploring Mysteries of Reality, Consciousness, and the Unexplained. So it's a little preview of the artwork I've put together there. And what Myth.OS really entails is not really just about the scientific side of things, but how we understand the whole aspect of consciousness itself and where that's going to take us into our new understanding of the world and how we interact socially, and what that means for the potential interaction of non-human intelligence. This is what we'll get into later on. The subtitle for this particular presentation we're going to talk about is Simulation Theory, Non-Human Intelligence, and then we're going to also look into how this is going to affect our understanding of unexplained phenomena, whether it's, again, UFOs, alien encounters, strange creatures, paranormal phenomena, and just all kinds of interesting anomalous things. So one of the big premises to Myth.OS is essentially dealing with how we can understand detectable or potentially detectable structures or different things within our own reality, whether it's within our world, physically or non-physically, or out there in the universe when we start exploring into the deep reaches within outer space and to the galaxy and beyond. So I think it's something that will help us to understand how our own psyche works, how our own individuated states of consciousness are integrated with the bigger collective, and how that will affect us overall. So we can say that if the world and universe we exist within is made up of a network of interconnected systems, then it may be possible for us to eventually accurately detect and interface with those systems and their properties, users or agents, and even the system operators through high degrees of both organic and technological science. Now, this is important to think about because a lot of mystical, spiritual teachings and wisdom teachings throughout the world deal with the ascension of humanity into a higher degree of existence through organic, natural means. Well, I've always felt that that's a very interesting concept. I've always found that that's something we always should strive for no matter what, is to just better ourselves naturally, organically. But when we live in a world that's being highly synthesized and more synthetic every day with technology, AI, things like that, it should become increasingly apparent to us that this is something that is going to affect the nature of how we perceive reality, and what is potentially going to be a big part of how we use science in the future, and how we use information, how we digest new information and come across it out in the field. So when we deal with organic or technological science, this is going to be how we naturally perceive things through our own physiological means, whether we're still basic human beings, Homo sapiens like this, or we're going to continue to direct our evolution to something else through technological means. So this could also be dealing with high degrees of computer-assisted technologies, AI, and what else we might come up with. That's going to be something, maybe a combination of those things. Integrating ourselves with this technology, of course, is a big component in these transhuman talks, and that's going to be something we'll look at, as well as how the singularity is approaching in a way that perhaps this idea of the organic, natural, spiritual ascension is not an impossible one, but maybe diminishing due to the ongoing advances in technology and science and engineering, and where those departments will take us in our own evolution. So mythos itself essentially refers to a few things, and we can differentiate depending on how we're using it and in what context. So when we talk about mythos, we can use it simply as a way to identify the collective reality that we all exist within, our world or universe in which we are interactive participants, all the way down, scaled all the way down to where we can just say it just represents the personal mind and individual state of consciousness experiencing that collective reality. So all of the different states or scaled versions within that is something that we can understand as a particular type, version, or scale of mythos. Whether it's a social group, whether it's a collective group of humanity within one world, whether it's several worlds of interactive beings, or the overall connected universe, that's going to be something we can take a look at as well. These are different ways that we can differentiate the partitions of reality. And we're going to talk a little bit about how some of these things affect our understanding. And it's also going to get into some more philosophical concepts, like if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it actually make a sound, or does it even exist or anything? Because sometimes in science, we find out new things, new information that might dictate some high degrees of information that we at present start to understand a little bit more, but in times past may not have really been able to comprehend to such an extensive level. And dealing with something that is more philosophical, we find that a lot of this stuff might have been hinted at in religious, spiritual, and theological traditions, wisdom traditions throughout the world, such as the Vedic Indian concept of Maya, which is illusion. And we talk about this a lot in different ways with other terms, other terminology, other sort of culturally relevant ideas. So if the past can help us understand some of these things in a way that helps to glean insight as to the nature of reality with our modern understanding and developments in science, perhaps we should look back into them and not be dismissive of them in some kind of a disregarding way. I think it's really important to see how some of these things can fit into the grand scope of what humans have understood for a long time, maybe throughout all of known history and prehistory, before things were recorded. And I think that's really important, because when we have some of these ideas that show us that the physical material world is an illusion, this is exactly what we're finding out in different ideas dealing with simulation theory, the simulation hypothesis. And it's not necessarily to say that everything's fake or not real. We do live in a very physical, tangible world, but it could be that some of these forms of reality have been a part of integrated systems that are well beyond our comprehension as material beings. And so this is where we get into the more metaphysical, spiritual side, and seeing how this can be something for us to really get a better understanding of scientifically in our future. Because in my view, what we understand as spiritual practices and spiritual phenomenon, non-physical phenomenon, metaphysics, things like that, are simply aspects of nature that we don't comprehend to such a degree that we do in the physical world. So perhaps in some way we can learn more about the universe by studying this phenomenon. So when we talk about how these systems work, we can look at it again in a scalar format when we have local systems, which would be, our embodied states of consciousness. We have world systems. You can also see things like microcosmic systems. This would be atomic structures, chemical structures, getting into the quantum field. And then, of course, macrocosmic systems. This is going to be multi-world properties, thinking about how we can see the bigger picture of world systems and how they operate together. there's an interesting cosmological concept called orbital resonance, and it just hints at the notion that celestial bodies like planets and stars have a vibratory state or property that can affect other celestial bodies. And even that simple notion should show us that a collective field of celestial bodies has its own sort of dynamic of how it operates. And so this should give us a better understanding about how what we might be able to see as a collective field within the macrocosmic system. And we get into things like the metaphysical systems, which are what I like to refer to as potentially detectable systems with unknown properties, dimensional properties, or advanced sciences, which we're really kind of skimming the surface. We're really getting to stuff now, I think, that's been hinted at for millennia. And something I like to call phantom systems, which would be systems that are pre-existing that may not really be in the same state of existence now that maybe they once have been at some ancient point in time, remnant systems, relict systems, things that maybe had been constructed by advanced intelligences that are no longer in operation or no longer active, but that still might have some sort of remnant properties that are detectable. That to me is really interesting to consider. And of course, we can consider that when we talk about something like the void. This is dealing with nothingness, which is itself sort of a paradox, because once we conceive of nothingness, if such a thing is even possible, then through that conscious distinction, something can be made of that nothingness, and then through that nothing becomes something. I think it's really kind of a philosophical idea, but when you deal with the nature of how this interconnective system would work, dealing with this scalar concept of individuated states through animals, through simple microbial forms of organic material, which coalesce into what we understand as physiological organic vessels. I think that it's really a huge puzzle that we only see small pieces to, and that we might connect a few things here and there. We might not be able to see the grand scope of things, but it helps us to perceive and to project into our own psyche, our own mythos, personal state of consciousness, that there could be ideas of reality well beyond our own perception. And we can understand this simply by blowing a dog whistle. Right there, we can see that there are varying degrees within our own field of operation that we can't perceive, at least through normal states of consciousness. And we'll get into how we can maybe understand more through altering those states. Within these systems, I like to say that we probably have a few roles that we enact upon and that allow us to have an interactive field to play within or operate within. So we can say some of these roles deal with things like the operators, the agents, as primary roles. This is going to deal with how we understand our natural sense of interaction within the world. And then maybe the idea of how we can look at various computer and computational systems today, and even just simple forms of administration and operation on current forms of network technology. So if you are an admin or an administrator of, or a programmer of various computer systems and technologies, then you probably have a lot of roles or at least capabilities that most users or agents, in other words, would not have. So if there's an operator of a collective world system, we might perceive this as some form of advanced intelligence, perhaps a deity, or simply through more technological or hyper advanced means, we could see how this is a form of intelligence that may be beyond a physiological specimen like humanity, or perhaps it does have a physical vessel that we just comprehend differently, but that has the capabilities within the physical and material world that we live in that seem to surpass our restraint in what we can do as physical agents. So perhaps operators of our physical world are misinterpreted as angels or demons or aliens or some other form of interaction that we misinterpret on occasion. And this is something I think we always talk about in these different circles, dealing with the paranormal, dealing with consciousness. It gives us something that I think can help us scope out what we're dealing with when it comes to interaction with what I like to refer to as non-human intelligence. So again, whether that's something extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, extrasolar, whatever that is, I think it's something we could be learning more about by investigating further into it. And of course, you have secondary roles that we can give names to. I threw some names together to kind of give an idea about what we could possibly find, which would be like progenitors, gatekeepers, and usurpers. Simply what this means is a progenitor is going to be dealing with something that came before, like a group of intelligent beings that may have had some role in jump-starting various civilizations, or something that helped to enact upon a path in its own evolutionary existence that has kind of led to a certain state or quality of being. And this is hinted at in a lot of ideas that we see popular in even the mainstream now, which is things like ancient astronaut theory or paleo contact, the idea that advanced beings had some role to play in the upbringing of humanity. So perhaps the progenitors of certain groups have a vast knowledge, or maybe they have a limited knowledge of the systems they interact within, and they too are simply agents within greater systems. Gatekeepers, these are just simply agents that have knowledge about the systems that we interact within that we have to potentially interface with to learn more about our reality. I think a lot of the contact modalities that are utilized when dealing with non-human intelligences may be attempting to ascertain information about the nature of reality through these so-called gatekeepers that maybe hold the keys to the understanding of the universe and of physics and of nature. The irony is that we have something that happened recently. I touched upon this briefly. Is that as many of you well know, that the Israeli space personnel came forward recently to discuss how they knew that we had been in contact with aliens, that the U.S. had been in contact with aliens, and that these beings are simply trying to learn more about space and just being able to find out things like that. And I think that that's interesting to consider. Not that it's impossible, but that you would find that it's probable that advanced entities existing within other worlds, extraterrestrial biological beings, would probably have a vast knowledge if they're capable of traveling here by whatever means, that they probably have a lot more information about space than we do. So it makes us wonder, would they really be inquiring about space to humans, or would they be more curious about what we think about space culturally? And perhaps it's more of an anthropological gesture. But I think that these are sort of speculative leaps that we have to keep in some confines here. And of course, usurpers, this would be like, well, in the event that we're able to potentially utilize advanced sciences to the degree that maybe these so-called advanced beings would have, then we can maybe reach that point in our own evolution that helps us to ascend, so to speak, into a higher degree of existence. So perhaps we will take over where a potential progenitor may have once left off, and then we can kind of proceed if we are able to piggyback off of that. And of course, this is also hinted at in a lot of UFO lore and material dealing with the ideas of back engineering, reverse engineering of potential crash retrievals and exotic technologies. When we deal with the operators and agents, this is something I think it's more viable to kind of get into. An operator would be something like the system programmer that has capabilities within the system itself to modify and change things. So as you see here, it says a system operator would be a singular or collective form of agency which has the capacity to alter and manipulate the system properties in varying degrees, if not administering total control of the system. So we have to understand that, in this scope of, let's just keep it simple to our own physical world and maybe the properties non-physical that are a part of that as well. If there are operators or a singular operator, perhaps there are agents directly under that operator that have administrative capabilities, but maybe not have total administrative control. And you could call these power users. This is all very analogous to what we see in information technology and IT and computer networking. And so this is something I think that really ties into what we are now seeing as sort of this new concept of perception, technologically speaking. We can see how religion in the scope of what it does for humanity and giving us a lens of perception to understand the world and our attempts at it, our current developments with technology help us to do the same thing. So it may be that we can see how something like our future understanding of the world might be dictated by technology rather than by belief in sort of religious-based constructs. So we might have something more of a theological technocracy, and I think that's kind of an interesting idea. And it's going to be something how we will have to proceed forward in a way that it will integrate both human morale, ethics, compassion, and then what we do with our less sort of emotional side of humanity and into what we're doing with logic and reason. Very much right brain, left brain type qualities, a lot like what Greg Bishop was getting at, I think, in some of his material in his presentation the other day. And I think that it's something we all have to consider is what we're looking at in our near future. And of course, agents and agent, in accordance with philosophy, is basically in regards to identifying forms of consciousness, which we can call non-human entities or other life forms. Agency is therefore the capacity to act. And this is a philosophical term. So, if we are all agents within the system, we have the capacity to act, maybe more so than others, maybe less so. We have to understand that some of these agents may have abilities vastly beyond our own comprehension, but that it doesn't necessarily mean that they are gods per se, or programmers or operators of whatever system. Because even though it might be something which we could look at as some animals that we interact with here in our world might seem more or less primitive to us, as humanity sort of egotistically likes to perceive itself as the pinnacle of physiological evolution here in our world, we might consider that same degree of scalar separation can be perceived from something beyond us, when we can maybe have an idea of what lies between where we are and the total scope of systematic control at the so-called top. And I think it's, dealing with a lot of philosophical ideas, but we have to utilize this in our ability to differentiate between a non-human intelligence that's relative to ours or vastly beyond ours that we don't have hardly any comprehension of. If we can classify these agents, I think that'll help us give us an idea about what we're dealing with. Some of these might be more applicable than not, but let's say class A would be a humanoid biological entity. That's really important because we might run into non-biological entities, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But when we talk about things like class A's, humans, humanoids, and of course, everything we see in some of the great science fiction stories and movies and media of our time, things like Star Wars, are full of biological humanoids of all sorts. So this would be something like class A agent. So if we have class A agents that are biological, what does that mean for other potentially non-biological or non-humanoid entities? So that's going to get into class B, which are more things like, of animals. These are still biological, so let's focus on that for a moment. Animals, plants, and insects, these are non-humanoid. These are going to be things that we probably find a lot of out in our deep exploration, deep space exploration. So, we're often told that we'll probably find microbial life and things like that. Humanoid forms, if the universe favors, for whatever reason, favors humanoid form, if you have things like convergent evolution happening in other worlds, then maybe that's a pattern that we need to investigate and look into sort of these sequences that are repeating and numeric sequences and codes and signatures that help us to understand the system itself, and if these patterns can be detected in other ways. Class C deals with microcosmic entities, again, nano and particle scale, microbial life. And then, of course, class D is the opposite, dealing with macrocosmic entities. These would be like looking at planet Earth as an entity or as a living organism itself. And this is actually something that science is really, as a whole, is starting to kind of get a better grasp of, and how its own world systems contribute to a greater form of existence. So perhaps we'll find that stars, planets, galaxies, or even other cosmological structures have their own form of consciousness or intelligence, or just a living entity itself. And then again, class E, a technological entity. This is like artificial intelligence, AI, and robotic technologies that we're even making today. Perhaps they might have stemmed from the idea that, let's say, natural physiological beings like us started something that turned into AI, and the philosophical dilemma is, does that still make it natural, considering that it's an extension of us, and is it in some way still affected by natural thought processes or interaction? And it's interesting to consider that perhaps extraterrestrial civilizations throughout the universe have amassed the degree of technological sophistication to also produce its own form of AI. And it's also hinted at that perhaps we'll find other forms of AI in the universe that have belonged to precursor civilizations, or maybe some that are still around but just don't have the means of space travel. So maybe perhaps similar and parallel to ours. Class F deals with metaphysical entities. You could also just say non-physical entities. And this could be advanced or maybe not so advanced, but maybe just in their own right, something that developed through immaterial means. And then, of course, Class G would be a transcendental entity. This would be something that has power, control, manipulative, and altering abilities over systems. And so people, I think, could perceive these as things that we see in theological societies and traditions as God or gods, angelic entities, demonic entities, perhaps, advanced alien intelligences, things that we perceive in our own cultural concepts, but that we still fall short of understanding. And so whether it's transcendental to us or to others, it just gives us a disposition. And that's what any of this is, because in the grand scheme of the universe, to attempt to identify anything, we have to encapsulate it with thought and symbolism and language. And so in doing that, we are actually degrading its own value. And I think Greg also mentioned something pretty important that was hinted at, that art actually is more surreal than reality at times, because it helps give us something that's a more conceptual basis than what is actually there. And so when we give ideas or thoughts to what we're perceiving, it helps us to understand more about how we can really process it in our own mythos, in our own sociological, cultural understanding of the world around us. So when we have these different groups of agents, let's just use humanity as an example, you probably are going to develop something that is going to help the group of agents go through trials and tribulations just like any other specimen or organism in the world or in the rest of the cosmos. You have different detections of system properties, which are going to be, let's keep it simple for the sake of our interaction here. Early people might find certain plants or animals or foodstuffs that they can locate within their immediate field or their environment. Once they've detected those properties that exist within that system, you can continue to work towards harvesting them or utilizing them. So then comes phase 2, which is the evolutionary obstacle number 1. Now, this could be a lot of things, but I think for the sake of this example, we'll just say, well, perhaps you have one person who wants to take all the food for themselves and then not really be able to distribute it evenly amongst the society or tribe or band or whatever it is that you have. And so once you do that, once you find an effective way to coalesce that dynamic of food distribution and resources evenly amongst your group, or at least to some effective degree of survival to where you could prosper, thrive a little bit, then you get to the next part where you have something like an agent-to-agent interface. Now, this could mean a lot of things. It could mean that one group of people encounters another group of people, and that you have something happen that could be conflicting, or they get along. Maybe this one says we found some really good food, and this one says we found some really good mineral and alloy resources, or just other tool making materials so that we can work together. Or maybe there's something that they can work out. So the agent-to-agent interface is simply a formula that we can apply to degrees of interaction between different life forms, whether it's its own group, like humanity. So obstacle phase 2 would be, how do we work together? Are we going to kill each other and assimilate, or basically just totally experience a genocide of one group and the longevity of another group? Or are they going to work together to find a common ground? And so after you experience that, you go eventually to maybe something that's going to be what we can call an agent to operator interface. And this is going to be, the operators are going to be the ones with more systematic control of the realm or the environment that these groups and these agents exist within. To an extreme degree, this would be like what we hear in a lot of religious material of people and religious figures interacting with higher beings or higher entities or advanced entities, whether they're angelic, demonic, they're deified by some means, if they're God or a god, whatever we're using to describe that. This is something that I think we see a lot in a way that is enlightening. It also helps to bring about a sort of apocalyptic understanding and an unveiling of sorts to our limited perception of reality. And of course, you have to get through obstacle phase 3, which is, does that new information also coalesce with the current progress of society? And if it doesn't, then perhaps it gets stuck and stagnates within the ignorance of the group. Let's say, for instance, someone like Nikola Tesla had a lot of great ideas, and at the time they weren't really integrated to such a widespread degree as maybe they could have. But because of certain things that happened, we were limited on our ability to figure out how to make use of that in a way that made sense for the whole group of people, our societal group of agents, right? And that just goes to show that maybe some people have greater understandings than others within those agent societies. And it may not always integrate so well. And if it does, then perhaps we can therefore move on and advance into a better understanding. Just when science integrates new information, new discoveries, it sets a new standard for understanding, or so we hope. Sometimes it's not always the case. Sometimes we backtrack and we regress. And when we talk about philosophy, we'll look at 3 major groups. We talk about theology, which is the study of God, religion, and religious beliefs, and how some of these things do play into our modern understanding of nature, reality, and where we're going to go with technology and engineering, and what this means for our ability to relate ancient concepts or even modern religious concepts into where it'll be relevant into our future. Of course, we have cosmology, which is the study of the universe, of the cosmos, and astronomy, and things like that. It can get very dense, but I think this is a fascinating area that really does bridge the gap between what we're learning now and what has been thought of and conceived of for ages past. And then, of course, metaphysics, the study of nature, the study of the nature of reality, which we just regard as beyond the physical. So, it's something that we see a lot in spiritual circles, sort of new age ideas, but they're really not so new age per se, because a lot of ancient groups of people were integrating these thoughts into their daily lives and using them as a form of interaction. So we have to see how some of these concepts will still be relevant in our future based upon what we're discovering, and if there is really any merit to their effectiveness. Jumping forward, we're going to look into how some of what we describe as unexplained phenomenon will affect our understanding scientifically and into our development as well. We're going to look at a few major areas: ufology, which is the study of UFOs; spectrology, which is like paranormal activity; parapsychology, this is going to be psychic abilities and ESP; cryptozoology, looking into and investigating unknown creatures and strange animals that we detect or might have encounters with; anomalous archaeology, various sites around the world or perhaps beyond that give us inclination to look further into something which may not be a natural occurrence; and of course xenology, which is kind of a fringe subject right now that's actually gaining a lot of steam in the scientific field. This is going to deal with an anthropological approach to understanding non-human intelligence and entity investigation. So let's go through some of these a little bit more in detail. and it'll give us something we can kind of jump into as we're going to run through these. So ufology deals with the nature of sightings and reports of unidentified flying objects, of course, which we probably are all familiar with. But the official verbiage for this is UAP, or unidentified aerial phenomenon. You also deal with abduction experiences, things like aliens, extraterrestrial life, or extraterrestrial biological entities, and then contact initiatives. Other things like ancient astronaut theory, paleo contact, and how ancient people had some interaction or involvement with people from other places that had something to do with our upbringing, like we said before. We have to understand the government and political involvement, and as well as the military and military-industrial complex involvement, how this affects the nature of national security, defense secrecy, and a lot of things. And of course, where this really goes into the technology sector, engineering, and what it means for energy, and how we can utilize engineering for the future. When it comes to spectrology, there's a lot out there. I think that when we look at some of these things, it seems lofty, but some people are really adamant that this is a very valid area of study. We can think about paranormal activity as a way to detect things just outside the scope of physical reality that seem to give us indication that there may be phenomena existing within and overlapping within our own material realm, but that falls short of any real concrete evidence sometimes that we can maybe use to find traces of. You also have sightings and reports of ghosts and spirits, haunted locations and orbs, apparitions, phantoms, ports and manifestations of objects. Demonology is our attempt at understanding some of these things, and of course the studies of what we consider the supernatural, which deals with the idea that maybe some of these entities or figures described in theological scripture can give us an idea about maybe some of the actual forms of intelligence that are actually there in our collective existence that we can work with. Parapsychology, obviously, something that I think really does interconnect with some of these fields to some degrees. You have psychic abilities, extrasensory perception or ESP, telepathy, psychokinesis, and mediumship and channeling. A lot of times people describe channeling entities or so-called higher powers or higher states of intelligences to bring in new information and awareness into the world. Spirit communication, sometimes through devices that we create or engineer. You also have things like remote viewing, out-of-body experiences. And then we have to look at, again, the investigation technology we use to find or detect these types of phenomenon. And then government and military involvement to some degree, this is something we see has taken place in interesting ways. And in what capacities does this give us something we can use to further our scientific understanding of the natural world? For cryptozoology, I think it's important that we consider that, most of the cryptids or the creatures we encounter in this field may very well just be, as it says, flesh and blood animals, and are in no way some sort of paranormal entity or some kind of interdimensional creature that has these vast capabilities. But then again, maybe there are things out there that can do that. We just have to see if what we have at present, and maybe in our historical ability to research, if there's any indication for something more than physiological means. Because, when we look at Bigfoot and Sasquatch and things like that, and reports and studies and encounters thereof, we have to differentiate, because if we lump all of these things into one area, it makes a very difficult time for any serious scientific effort to make any progress. So are we dealing with flesh and blood animals, or are we dealing with some sort of advanced physiology? And of course, we also deal with the idea of anthropomorphism, which is essentially a humanoid animal-based entity that you often see in things like Mothman or Dogman or any something man. Any idea that you have a sort of humanoid cryptid, anthropologically, is kind of like a non-feasibility. And so to consider, what is the evolutionary feasibility of some of these things? Is it natural for there to be a dogman out there? Science and zoology tells us no. But if people are experiencing something out of the ordinary, then we need to see what's actually happening, and if this is something we can understand more about. Anomalous archaeology, of course, this is something really exciting to me, because this is something I think is really going to help get us further along into understanding what's actually out there, and not just through physical means, but through digital means and through maybe metaphysical means as well. So we have to consider the existence of exotic technologies and out-of-place artifacts or UParts, unknown construction methods and materials used by people like ordinary humans, but we can jump out and speculate what would alien civilization use. And then, of course, ancient architectural anomalies and how this plays into our understanding of world history. We need to look at megalithic structures and how some of these sites still defy modern understanding in engineering. We have to understand energy generation and transference. Some of these structures are allegedly generating energy and able to transfer that energy by some means. And are we looking at a high degree of architecture and design and something that we would consider like a macro computer? I think that's worth looking into. And of course, we have to understand the historical value and misconceptions of some of these things. And of course, what would the implications be of sort of the geographical inaccessibility of a lot of the different detectable or potentially detectable architecture and archaeology that we could find? It would mean a lot for us to find something in a place that people just couldn't get to naturally or through ordinary means. And of course, jumping into that sort of last area of xenology, the cultural anthropology of advanced civilizations deals with a number of things, and it's going to be a branch that I think will get more credence in our near future. I think within the next several years, we'll start to have to look more into how the theoretical side of things will become a more applicable science. We're going to look at astrobiology, astrolinguistics, how groups of people in other worlds will have to communicate, interact socially, use symbolism, use means of interaction, and then, of course, understanding advanced morphology, metamorphological implications of creatures and entities and beings from other worlds. We have to think about scalar degrees of perception when it comes to exactly what we were mentioning earlier about agents in different systematic scopes of the world. We need to think about how advanced technology works, if it's going to be hard physical science engineering, or if it's going to be something that we would consider more of a so-called spiritual technology or dimensional technology that we are detecting through metaphysical means. A lot of people seem to think that advanced entities and spiritual entities use that form or that mode of technology that isn't detectable by material technology. So directed evolution and then possibilities of human interaction are also a big part of how we have to understand our own understanding of what we could consider an alien culture. And when I say alien, I'm bringing up a sort of more broad term of use, because we can say alien is just a being from another planet, or you could say alien simply means foreign. And so any potentially so-called foreign groups of entities beyond our world, or that are integrated into our world through interdimensional means, extrasolar means, whatever that is, we have to see how their societal interactions take place, and then how our interactions take place with them, and how our understanding of our own world, our world including them, and then their world all is affected anthropologically, simply through acknowledging the existence of non-human intelligence. So the main ideas here that we're going to take a look at through delving into the studies within this work of Myth.OS are going to be integrating what we understand scientifically and in spiritual communities around the world. So will our advanced and modern scientific ideas help us to understand these concepts that we've seen from many cultures? And do any of these practices still have any relevance or effective way to help us, ascertain information into the future? So, spirituality consists of many ideas. I mean, it's ironic. It's sort of weird to even encapsulate it, because it transcends beyond the material aspect. But let's say we can just consider it as examining ideas and concepts relating to the soul or spiritual essence, spiritual healing and healing concepts, and then spiritual guidance, spirit guides, what that could potentially mean, prayer, worship, and meditation, how those things are affected by the field or the system we exist within, ritual practices, medicinal ceremonies, dreams, visions, prophecies, reincarnation, embodiment. All of these things essentially we see in various cultures, even in the modern world, you can get an idea about how they affect the interaction in those societies, and how the system that we operate within has a sort of ability to mesh those actions into an effective way that we can interact with in our own world. So when it comes to that, I think that you have to understand how science is developing in its own right to understand nature and what we're dealing with in a way that we have to think about new discoveries and how new discoveries are implemented technologically and in the engineering sectors, our medical advances, how it can help us in those regards, advanced physics and quantum mechanics. Those are really big areas that I think this is something that we're going to end up seeing a lot of in the near future as well. We have to think about multidimensional geometry and fractals, things like computer sciences, artificial intelligence, robotics, the singularity, AI-assisted learning. And of course, this is really diving into something a bit more popular now. It came out a little while back, but simulation theory, or the simulation hypothesis, the computational theory, and world systems theory. So getting into all of these ideas, it really helps us to get something that coalesces in a way that we have to understand the connection between ancient spirituality and then modern and then future scientific advances. So in conclusion, when we're talking about some of these areas, essentially what we're dealing with is the integration of information by means of controlled, limited, or total disclosure pertaining to any number of currently unexplained phenomena may lead to an enormous leap of collective awareness and social change, as well as advances in opportunities for open source technological engineering capabilities, health and wellness applications, and directed evolution, which may lead to a more comprehensive understanding of ourselves as individuated fractals of consciousness within a participatory unified system. So that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of information. It seems very convoluted. The most practical way to understand this, understand the idea of what Myth.OS is delving into, is how can modern sciences help us to evaluate the possibility of what we're experiencing when it comes to unexplained phenomenon, how ancient practices of spiritual and theological arts help us to understand what is relevant and what's still effective to utilize in our world, and if there are detectable things. So the main thing, the main takeaway from all of this is essentially that when you have the discovery of something new and new information that's detectable, and if there are potentially detectable forms of the system that we live in or the collective systems of reality out there within the universe, other worlds, that integration has to be an effective one. It has to help us and propel us forward. So it's going to be something we'll see heavily developed in the archaeological sector, the anthropological sector. We're going to use computer-assisted technology to help us understand various things. And I'm going to show, I'm going to do a sort of rapid-fire show of a few articles. I know we're getting close to the end here, but I want to just show the effectiveness of how some of these things are relevant and which ways we can actually utilize them in a practical, grounded way in our reality now, and how they'll be more than likely a very serious, real developing field within our near future and within our own lives. So again, these are all ideas that are incorporated into this publication I'm working on, hoping to have out soon before spring of next year. And I'm glad to be able to kind of connect that together for anyone who's interested. But what I'm going to do is pull up some of these pages here that I think are important to at least acknowledge. I'm not going to go through all of them in depth, but I think it's important to just show. There's a really interesting paper written by Nick Bostrom that deals with simulation theory. It's called "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" And this has gotten a lot of credence in recent times by various scientific figures. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Michio Kaku, even Elon Musk has talked a lot about this. Stephen Hawking hinted at it a lot of times. And so we're going to jump through some of these things, which I think people can tangibly go look into now and see how we can develop through exponentiated sense of engineering or use of technology and our own investigative abilities. We're going to detect things in our own reality and in other worlds that help us to integrate the understanding that we're probably not alone, that higher degrees of intelligences are out there, and that we live within integrated, interconnected systems that all function together through consciousness and through advanced degrees of understanding. So this is a really interesting article. I'm going to go on to some of these others. This one deals with a very similar idea. That's, so scientists say we could be living in a galactic zoo run by aliens, and it's something that I think also deals with the idea that is hinted at in a lot of ufological circles. We have articles that deal with how the advances in artificial intelligences are helping us to solve problems and equations and conflicts within various academic realms that have been worked on for a long time, but that now modern developments have helped us. So I'm looking at this in a way that if we continue this progress, AI-assisted technologies will be able to be applied astronomically in a way that we're going to detect structures and use this as a means of interfacing with non-human intelligence, was probably more over than through simple face-to-face, basis like you and I talking in a room. And we also want to see how some of these things are going to be built upon to help us gradually socially integrate better ideas and normalcy of these ideas. Like, what if there is life on Mars, and is it just going to be simple microbial forms, or is it going to be full-on humanoid physiological vessels? I think that these ideas being shared now help to get us prepared for what's to come in our near future. So going through some of these, like I said, even Stephen Hawking had the idea, as you can see here, that the universe is a hologram. He sort of had this holographic theory. And I think that is interesting. We need to look at how we can utilize understanding black holes and the energy being emitted from them, and the radiation that can be examined helps us to understand early patterns within the universe, and just patterns in general. A lot of these different articles are on government and science and institution websites, so you can all check these out as well. Another interesting idea is that consciousness and memory and intelligence may not be local; it may be non-local. There's an interesting story about how a heart transplant donor had things happen to them, and then the recipient received memories from the donor, and so maybe memories and consciousness is not local to the brain. Maybe it's something vastly different. So we also can look at how advances in remote perception affect our ability to discover new things. Maybe we'll send out vessels and robotic forms of AI into the universe through the use of, like it says here, control of a humanoid robot by a non-invasive brain computer interfacing humans. So maybe we'll be sending things out to other planets that we can remotely control, as if we were simulated there by a program or a vessel that'll help us to ascertain more information. And of course, this one came out more recently, but hints at information that's been around for a little while. There used to be aliens in our galaxy, but they killed themselves off. The idea that maybe civilizations can only develop so far, and that they reach a threshold where they either kill themselves or have warfare, or can't evolve beyond something that they need to go past, like the evolutionary obstacle phases that we mentioned before. So this is really important, and it's also hinted at through the Kardashev scale, which deals with the planetary evolution, the solar evolution, and then the galactic evolution of a civilization. Moving along, we have some of these other areas here. Let me see if this one's loading up. Discoveries within our own solar system, like this is fast superhighway through the solar system discovered. Are we going to use advanced forms of archaeological investigation to detect elements of our reality that are already present, but we're just now finding, have a strong part of the system of operation we work within? So this is really important to consider, how extensions of this form of investigation will help us to discover new things for us, but things that have probably been around for a long time. I threw this one here because it's important. This is also personal to me. I've had an incredible ayahuasca experience myself, but this is on popular mechanics. Ayahuasca could do something amazing to your brain. Could these and other psychedelic, medicinal, and ceremonial uses of some of these substances help us to unlock channels of reality outside of our normal scope of perception. I think that there's a lot within these areas that we should focus on to help us perceive certain qualities about reality that aren't normally available to us. And then three things that are kind of tangent with each other. You have ideas called the Jupiter brain. We'll start with this in the Boltzmann brain, the idea that brains can simulate reality better than the universe kind of coming through natural means is an interesting notion in science called the Boltzmann brain. You also have what's called a Jupiter brain. Jupiter brain is essentially an entire planet that's been terraformed or engineered into a computer that actually simulates a world or multiple worlds. It's called the Jupiter brain. And then a Matryoshka brain, which is essentially the same thing, but at an exponentiated scale. And it says future or extraterrestrial civilizations could create megastructures the size of a solar system. So taking the Jupiter brain and making it into a scale larger, let's say a solar system that utilizes this to produce computer-based, computational-based simulations. Very, very interesting thought. And of course, just another aspect of artificial intelligence, which is finding patterns in Earth's biological mass extinction. So using these steps of our development and the technology and computational sciences and engineering, we can see how a lot of these things will help us to detect things within our own reality much greater probably than our own physiological means at present, unless something changes our structure, whether it's like hitting the galactic plane and getting radiated by some genetic upgrade or something. I don't know that we'll all experience that sort of spiritual ascension that's hinted at in all of these spiritual cultures in a way that's going to just give us unlimited powers and understanding. I think that technology is actually a really helpful thing. I'm not necessarily a proponent of transhumanism, but I think that it's on the rise, and I think we can't be naive to the reality that we exist in and the future that we're heading towards with technology, and that how a lot of these things will help us to explain unexplained phenomena through archaeological means, through investigating how anthropological investigation will be needed in the near future when we have encounters with non-human intelligences, and how science will have to shift our social understanding of what it means when these things are integrated to us in a way that sets a new standard for understanding. So those are a lot of the things that I think help to give us an idea about where we're going in our future. And my book and the work that I've been doing with Myth.OS helps to embody that in a few main areas that we discussed earlier. So I'd like to kind of toss it over back to you, Smiles, for any comments.
Well, it's incredibly comprehensive, and I think you've struck on to what I think the Anomaly Archives can be so helpful for, or any archive of our nature that deals with all these anomalous phenomena. They are gateways to further understanding the fabric of reality, the nature of the universe. And there's just so many different avenues for exploration and innovation. We've got a couple of questions before we break for the next presenter. How do we put this theory into practice? Have you thought of it, some kind of experiment in which we could hack into the mythical OS, the Myth.OS? Yeah,
this is really interesting. And I think, and that's Red Pill Junkie, great question. I think it's really important that we utilize that. I know he's really artistically inclined, and I think we have to utilize both right brain and left brain when we get to these ideas, because my perception of this is one thing, but I think we have to have an apparatus to really effectively probe the Myth.OS when we're dealing with the potential of an integrated system. I think that it's really going to be something advanced. AI will have to be used as a way to interface with. I think that it's going to help show us that we're going to end up discovering some system properties that are detectable eventually that we can interface with, and maybe not even just the properties, but the users and the sort of admins of the system will get a ping of. If you're mining into something and you're kind of probing into it, you will probably get some kind of interaction back that notices us doing that. And if we don't, and this is the other thing some people consider for simulation hypothesis, is that if it's self-correcting, it will do everything it can to cover up any noticeable differences that show us that, and that might be itself proof that we're in a simulation. So if we can probe into it or hack into it, interface through AI to communicate with the properties or the beings or the intelligences or whatever it is, I'd say that might be our best means in doing through advanced archaeological computer-assisted investigation. And if we can interface, then there's something that we've done to surpass an incredible barrier of technological and physiological evolution. If we don't really get to that point so easily, it may be that there's intention that we're not supposed to, and that is maybe even more interesting to me. So I think that's something that we have to think about with AI, with technology, with archaeology, and where that goes. So.
And finally, how does the mythos concept deal with the difference in the philosophy of the cathedral and the bazaar? Are the agents also creators before ascending to operators? You might understand this question better than me.
Yeah, I think that when we have the idea that maybe people in spiritual communities talk about we're co-creators of our existence, we're all co-creating things. I think that that's a valid idea. I don't know how effective it actually is, because sometimes we can create things. We can, like, artist Red Pill, I think, knows just how this can go. We can take a blank canvas and we can look at it and say, I recognize that it has infinite potential to be whatever. And then we have to actualize that potential to being able to see what we can turn it into. And so when we do that, we are sort of co-creators within the mythos system, within our own world mythos. I think that we can co-create to some extent, but to the extent that we become like literally the operators, we're the programmers, at that point we've become the usurper. And I think whoever was there before or is there now may be waiting on us to achieve a higher state of existence in order to actually hand us over the reins. Because, if you give the kids matches and they make fire, they'll just burn everything down. We need to have a better, more mature understanding of how to utilize the computer program when it's like AutoCAD or 3D Studio Max. You can create objects, but is it a chaotic field of just random shapes, or is it sensical? Is it artistic? Is it creative? Does it have meaning? Does it have purpose? Just like in the movies, The Matrix, all the agents tried to destroy the programs that weren't necessary anymore because they didn't have a purpose. So are we doing it to just do it, or is everything we're doing as agents in a co-creative mythos system have purpose? I think that those are very spiritual, philosophical, and scientific questions. I think hopefully the more we integrate our own understanding of material and metaphysical sciences, we'll be able to see how the idea of playing God isn't necessarily one that is good or bad, but is an idea of perception, is how we understand the world that we exist within, and then how we go from there in our own existence. So yeah, I think that there's a lot to that, and those are the questions that are brought up, and I think it's really important that we look into that, and we are open to have that dialogue, because that's where we actually, I think, make the best progress in our evolution.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel. Very interesting presentation, and I'm so glad that you're on the case. I think you're really gonna be out there on the forefront, integrating these things and helping guide us towards some better utilization of the knowledge that we're gaining through these explorations. So thank you so much for your time, and folks can go to the website that we've got the links on anomalyarchives.org to his awesome Vortex YouTube channel, and just keep up the great work, Daniel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Smiles. Wishing the best for everyone, and appreciate the time.
All right, folks, stay tuned. We got Stephanie Quick coming up in just a moment.